Hi, everybody. This is Dr. Eliana Aaron, Director of EMA Care. It is May 4th, 2020, and I'm going to talk to you today about a few things that are going on regarding coronavirus right now in the world, and specifically in the Jewish world, as well as some controversy regarding the use of thermometers for monitoring people before they go into stores and things like that, and how effective is that? I'm going to start off by talking about the cases in Israel. We had a lot of restrictions that were announced today that are being reversed, and that's really great. We have to wait until we actually see the regulations. They tend to announce them, and then the details of such come out a few days later. So we have to wait and see how that's going to work. I think it's important to note that Israel is down to the low double digits at this point. We've had 38 new cases today, 23 new cases yesterday, 84 the day before. So we're 3 days now below the 100 new cases mark. Most of those new cases are in the hotspots that are still under closure, but the rest of the country appears to be doing well with very, very few new cases popping up. And that's exactly what we want to see. And because of that, there's going to be an opening of the malls. There's going to be, the economy is going to slowly, not quickly, but slowly return to normal, with all the educational system returning to a normal schedule by the end of the month. Tourism is probably going to start in June, assuming that we're able to keep our numbers down, which is very exciting. The criteria that they're trying to get to is less than 100 new cases a day. It may not go to zero, but if it's less than 100 new cases a day and they're still monitoring people, then they feel that's a very reasonable risk as long as there's good monitoring. And, you know, Israel is doing very well in that regard. The question is, how well is the rest of the Jewish world doing? And that's really an interesting question. And there was a great article printed in Israel Hayom, and I'm going to review that with you because I think it's very interesting to see how the Jewish world fared outside of Israel. A lot of people who are following these videos are not from Israel, and I think it's important for people to understand, you know, what's going on in the Jewish world. So there are 6.7 million Jews in Israel. There are 8 million Jews in the rest of the world. So most Jews still live outside of Israel. In the United Kingdom, about 1.7% of all deaths in the country were Jews. So as of a few days ago, I think at the end of April, it was 352 Jewish people died, mostly in London. A lot of the deaths are attributed to a lack of social distancing towards the beginning. People were not following the regulations, particularly in more Haredi neighborhoods. There were a lot of deaths in Stamford Hill, and that's a Hasidic area in London. And so that's a disproportionate number of Jews in England who were died relative to the population, even though England is really still growing in terms of numbers. They haven't settled down, but that's where we are so far. And that's more than the whole country of Israel had. So we got to keep that in mind. In New York City, New York City has 8.5 million people in it altogether, which is a little bit less than Israel, but it's a similar size in terms of population. There are 2 million Jews in New York City. That's the 5 boroughs of New York City. It is estimated that over 700 Jewish people died in New York State. Most of them in Borough Park, Williamsburg, Crown Heights, and most of them are in New York City, in Brooklyn. The death rate is 10 times higher than the same period last year. And those deaths, the extra deaths, are attributed to the coronavirus, really targeting this community, unfortunately. According to the Chevra Kadisha, there were 500 deaths just between Purim and Passover alone, and in Brooklyn. So that's really quite a majority of the Jewish deaths in New York. And the death rate is of New York City alone, not the state, but the city is over 60 times the death rate in Israel. And that's for a similar population. So it didn't fare as well as Israel so far. The other thing to consider about the United States is about 26% of the Jewish population in America is over the age of 65. So in Israel, that's about 11%, and in the United States, it's 26%. So it's more likely that Jews who are living in the United States are in that target population that has a higher mortality rate. So we have to keep that in mind too. It still doesn't quite explain to us in any kind of objective way why 60 times the number died. And that's very distressing to the worldwide Jewish community. In France, again, a disproportionate number of Jews died relative to the population. Most of that is being attributed to Purim celebrations, which were before the restrictions kicked in. Remember, that was exactly the timing of when things started to take off in Europe. So let's keep that in mind, that Purim was a big issue internationally, not just in Israel. In Holland, there was an old age home, a Jewish old age home, killed 26 out of 120 residents. So Holland was also hit. In Morocco, 1% of the Jewish population died so far, and that's 15 out of 1,500 Jews in the country. And again, also a disproportionate number where you had a total, when this was printed, 162 deaths in the whole country of Morocco, 15 of which were Jewish, and Jews are a very small minority. So that's a very disproportionately large percentage of the population. In Argentina, 5% of the deaths so far, and Argentina is in the southern hemisphere. Southern hemisphere is just starting to tick up now. So we have to wait and see how that develops, but 5% of the deaths in Argentina are attributed to the Jewish community. And let's remember, the whole Jewish community in Argentina is 0.5% of the population. So that's a very large, disproportionate number of Jews that are dying. So why is this happening? The Jewish religion is a social religion. We pray in groups. We get together with family members. We're very social, religiously social. And Purim, like I said, was definitely a transition point for the Jewish community, at least in the Northern Hemisphere. Potentially what we're seeing in the Southern Hemisphere, and I guess the numbers are going to have to show us, is that Passover might have been that turning point for them, because that was closer to the seasonal changes where we're expecting a change in the Southern Hemisphere. So I wanted to just bring those issues up so we understand what's going on in the larger world. Israel is doing very well right now. I expect this will continue and that we're going to get to a normalcy by June. Summer programs in Israel are likely to actually happen. They may be a little different, they may be structured differently, there may be agreements about how people can enter the country in terms of screening, in terms of, that probably programs are going to have a plan if kids actually get ill. However, I think that tourism is going to open up, and I think that when the second wave does hit, and things are going to be monitored very carefully, but when that second wave hits, things are going to go back and we'll be prepared. But we also need to know they are going to go back to where they have been. It hopefully will be short term. We know how to handle this. The country's been through it, and we're pretty resilient here. We know how to handle these things. So I think we have to be prepared for that. I'm going to do another video about some other trends and issues that are going on now. And I wish everyone will be well, stay well, and please stay safe. Take care.